Good morning, everyone. My name is Jayla.M. I'm going to be talking to you about critical race theory today. So, do you guys believe that racism is a systemic problem in today's world? If not, that may be because you don't experience some of the certain things that other people may. If I told you there may be a way to fix or help the situation, would you guys believe me? Well, critical race theory just may be the solution to this problem, or at least one of the solutions to the problem, among many other things. According to my survey, 50% of you, or 2 out of 2 of you, do not know what critical race theory is. Out of those who do know what it is, 66% of you believe that it should be taught, and 33% of you believe that it should not be taught. And those who do believe that it should not be taught believe that critical race theory is teaching that white people are superior and black people are inferior. I'm going to inform you about what critical race theory is, what people have intended it to be, and what my standpoint is on critical race theory as well. Critical race theory is primarily an academic legal framework centered on that racism is a systemic problem in our cultures, values, laws, and it's not just a manifestation of prejudice or hostility. According to What Critical Race Theory Is and What It Is Not magazine, last updated on September 17th of 2021, the theory holds that racial inequality, because of the country's history of slavery, Jim Crow laws, and many other facets of American society, including lower educational attainment and home ownership for minorities, income equality, disproportionate arrest, and incarceration of black men. A lot of people assume that critical race theory is a moral theory of anti-racism that helps itself to a broad and wide tradition from Black Reconstruction and the founding of the NAACP and all the way to the Civil Rights Movement. According to What is Critical Race Theory and What Is Not magazine, last updated on September 17th of 2021, in the 1970s, the Harvard Law School professor Derek Bell expressed his frustration with what he saw as limitations of the Civil Rights Movement, and Bell and other legal scholars, such as Kimberly Crenshaw and Richard Delgado, argued that civil rights legislation and court victories had not totally been eradicated from the racial injustice, and racial progress in many respects have been stalled. Critical race theory started in the early 70s and is designed to analyze the law, so anything that is not the law or policy can be questioned. So at the end of the day, critical race theory is a sophisticated tool of the analyst of legal harms, and it works on the foundations of a larger tradition of abolitionism and the moral apparatus. So even though critical race theory has been created in the early 70s to primarily set an academic legal framework centered on the idea that racism is systemic and embedded in our institutions, cultures, values, laws, etc., and is being taught and perceived within the school districts. Critical race theory has turned into a negative concept within the school districts and is making a change. It is not teaching history and making change in society, but rather requiring students to label and identify themselves according to the critical race theory collides with law. Can a school require students to confess their privilege? In class article last updated in the fall of 2021, the class materials of a charter school, Democracy Prep in Las Vegas, Nevada, and others across the country mandate students to label and identify their race, religion, and sexuality and gender identities as well, and then determine whether they are part of an identity of privilege or not. The course obligates students to label white, if you're white, male, Christian, or heterosexual identities as well, and label them as privileged and they are dominant. According to the critical race theory collides with the law, can a school require students to confess their privilege in class article last updated in the fall of 2021. School districts continue to infuse critical race theory into their curriculum, and they might be confronted by the law. Civic curriculums place on heavy emphasis of the critical race theory, and all students are now required to take a year-long society to change course in certain schools. So even though there are complications within the critical race theory, I still believe that we should teach it, but place certain guidelines to prevent these things from happening. I think critical race theory should be taught to a certain extent by addressing what critical race theory was originally for, what it was originally created for, and focus on that rather than students confessing their privilege in class, which takes away from the primary focus of what critical race theory was intended for. According to my surveys, 75% of you, or 3 out of 4 of you, think that critical race theory should be taught in schools, and 25% of you, 1 out of 4 of you, think that it should not be taught in schools. So now, with everything you know, do you think it should be taught in schools? According to Why Critical Race Theory Fight is Harder Than Educators in Common Battle Corps article last updated on July 14th of 2021, the political action committees opposed the critical race theory for years. State lawmakers target it as part of a sweeping new restrictions on target of diverse concepts. Political actors probe for the best way to leverage the issue with the eye toward looming elections. According to Why the Critical Race Theory is Harder Than Educators, than the Common Core Battle article last updated on July 14th of 2021, education policy community for decades has focused on the standards, accountability, and assessments, but did not teach the profound divisions for our American history and identity. The divide in how people think about the role and the race of Americans past and present, driven by events such as the 2020 murder of George Floyd by a police officer, it has reflected in our struggle over how schools should address this racism as well as other issues, such as sexism. The issue is more personal and profound than any other government or white paper or decision. Schools are grappling with it again, and in a heated and fragmented political culture. I think systemic racism should be taken head on with the critical race theory being taught in our schools, and we need guidelines set so that things like students confessing their privilege in class does not happen, and we can solve the problem. In conclusion, I have informed you about what critical race theory is, what people have interpreted it to be, and I persuaded you that it should be taught in schools, with certain guidelines in place, of course. Critical race theory was created in the early 70s as an academic legal framework centered on the idea that racism is systemic and embedded in our traditions, culture, values, laws, and not just a manifestation of our prejudice and hostility. I believe that we should go back to the basics of the critical race theory to solve this systemic problem. An unknown teacher in Tennessee said, if we ban critical race theory, we lose the momentum of the moment and the potential to turn into some kind of measurable change.